There's a really good scientist, a university, land-grant university scientist, who I like to refer to as far as the science on target levels of nutrients. His name is Dr. William Albrecht. There's a few of his books laying around here. He was the chair of the soil department at the University of Missouri for 20 years, from the mid-30s to the mid-50s. He did his grad research looking at World War I draft records. He overlaid soil types and acceptance rates in World War I draftees, and found that boys from the Midwest, from the Corn Belt states, were accepted as draftees at about a 20% higher level than the boys from the Ozarks and Appalachia. And the reason, and the way you were determined whether you were fit to be, chemical weapons fodder or whatever, trench warfare hamburger, was based on what was the case for what they needed in the 1860s, which was the last big war, and that was whether you could march for 20 miles and you could eat hardtack. So if you had good arches and good teeth, you were fit to be cannon fodder. If you had flat feet and bad teeth, you weren't fit to be cannon fodder. And there was a higher level of flat feet and bad teeth in the Appalachia than there was in the Corn Belt. And so he said, I wonder why. He was a farm boy, so he was curious. He had to thought outside of the box. And he found that there were different mineral levels and ratios in the soil in Illinois and Indiana and Iowa than there were in Missouri and Kentucky and Massachusetts and places like that. And this was what he realized, and then so he started to do scientific experiments. This is the land-grant university professor, head of the university, right? This is like UConn, head of the Plant and Soil Science Department at UConn. I'm not sure what's called at UConn. At UMass it's called Plant and Soil Science Department. This is the head of the department. This is his research. 20 years of research, 500 published papers. This is legitimate, serious science, which happens to be under the rug currently, but is the foundation of a lot of this. The rationales for targets. You need so much boron, you need so much calcium, etc. He took clay, and he put the clay in a centrifuge and spun it really, 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 really fast until everything that was attached to the clay spun off. And then he added to this clay 55% calcium, 15% magnesium, 3% potassium, and to this clay 70% calcium, 10% magnesium, 2% potassium, etc., 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 etc. And then grew corn and grew wheat and grew potatoes in those different soils, and then fed those soils, those crops, to rabbits and to cows and to chickens and rats for multiple generations. So you take the crops grown in different soils and you feed them to animals for multiple generations, and he could cause these rabbits, these ones to be half again as big and vigorous and long-lived and healthy in 2 generations, and these ones to be smaller and weaker and succumb to disease. This is old science. And so I think as I understand it, a lot of our soils here in the Northeast are systemically deficient in a couple basic elements. And there's more than 3 elements, right? I mean, people are familiar with NP and K. You get a bag of fertilizer, it's got a number, one of 3 numbers, 542, 32, 52, 18, or what the numbers are. Doesn't really matter. But those are NP and K, and those are critical for a plant to grow. But there's a lot more necessary for a plant to grow healthily. And actually, this is where it gets really exciting to most people, there's a lot more critical for a human to grow healthily. If we're actually growing food to grow humans, then the nutrients that your body needs should be in your food, and when they're not, then your body doesn't get the nutrients it needs, and then what happens to your body? Your body breaks down. We call it degenerative disease. So Albrecht was able to do this in rabbits and cows and pigs, and this has been done. This is old science. You take the nutrients out, boom, they get smaller, they get sicker, they get weaker, they succumb to more disease.